The cart was already rolling downhill before Mira even understood what was happening. One moment she was tying a rope around a crate of ripe peaches, humming to herself under the warm afternoon sun, and the next moment, 3 small shapes burst out of the tall grass at the edge of the orchard and slammed into the wheels of her cart with such force that the whole thing lurched forward and began to speed away. "Hey, stop! Come back here!" Mira shouted, dropping the rope and sprinting after it. The 3 shapes were wolf pups, gray and brown, their tails wagging with pure excitement, as if this was the greatest game they had ever played. They gripped the wooden frame of the cart with their small teeth, pulling and pushing it in different directions, sending peaches bouncing out onto the dirt path in a chaotic, golden trail. Mira's chest tightened. That cart held nearly half of her harvest for the festival. Fruit she had spent all morning picking under the hot sun, fruit that would feed families and fill baskets at the market the following week. She could not lose it, not like this, not to a trio of overexcited animals who clearly had no idea what damage they were causing. "No, no, no," she muttered, her sandals slapping against the packed earth as she chased the runaway cart down the sloping path that led toward the forest. "Please, just stop." The pups did not stop. If anything, her shouting seemed to make them more excited. One of them, the smallest, let out a happy yip and gave the cart another push with its front paws, sending it rattling faster down the hill toward the tree line. Mira's lungs burned. She had never been much of a runner. Her days were spent bent over rows of peach trees, carefully checking each piece of fruit for ripeness, not sprinting across uneven ground chasing after mischievous animals. But there was no time to think about that now. The cart was gaining speed, and if it reached the rocky slope near the stream, it would tip over completely, and she would lose everything. "Somebody help!" she called out, though she doubted anyone would hear her. The orchard sat at the edge of the village, and most people were still occupied with their own harvesting duties further up the hill. That was when she heard footsteps behind her, fast and steady, closing the distance between them with an ease that made her own frantic pace look clumsy by comparison. "You will want to move to the left," a deep voice said calmly, as though this entire situation was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "The path narrows ahead. If the cart hits the rock there, it will tip." Mira barely had time to glance sideways before a tall man appeared beside her, matching her pace without any visible effort. He had dark hair streaked faintly with silver at the temples, though his face did not look old at all. His eyes were a striking shade of gold, catching the afternoon light in a way that human eyes simply did not. "Who are you?" Mira gasped between breaths. "Someone who is very sorry for what is happening right now," the man said, and there was something wry in his tone, as if he already knew exactly what was causing her cart to roll away on its own. "Those 3 troublemakers belong to me." Mira did not have time to process that sentence fully, because at that exact moment, the cart hit a small bump in the road, and one of the peach crates flew off the back, spilling fruit everywhere. She let out a sound of pure frustration and pushed herself to run faster, ignoring the ache building in her legs. The man beside her moved forward smoothly, closing the gap between himself and the cart in only a few strides. It was strange, almost unnatural, how fast he covered the ground, as if his body understood something about speed that ordinary people simply did not. "Pepper, ash, clover." He called out sharply, using a tone that carried authority without needing to be loud. "Enough. Let go this instant." For a moment, it seemed as though the pups might actually listen. Their ears perked up at the sound of his voice, and the smallest one, apparently named Clover, glanced back toward him with something like guilt in her round dark eyes. But excitement and mischief were powerful things in young animals, and instead of stopping, all 3 of them gripped the cart tighter and pulled it toward a bend in the path that led straight toward the stream. "They are not listening to you," Mira called out, half amused despite her panic. "They rarely do," the man admitted, sounding more resigned than angry. "But I promise you, this will end well. Trust me." Mira had no reason to trust a stranger she had met only seconds ago, especially one who seemed unbothered by wild animals dragging her livelihood toward a rocky stream bed. But there was something steady in his voice, something that made her believe, at least for now, that he knew what he was doing. They ran together down the winding path, weaving around fallen branches and low bushes, the cart always just out of reach ahead of them. Mira's side ached with a sharp stitch, but she pushed through it, refusing to give up on her harvest without a fight. "There," the man said suddenly, pointing ahead. "The stream bend. If we cut across the grass here, we can reach it before they do." Without waiting for her response, he veered off the main path and sprinted through the tall grass at an angle that would intercept the cart's path. Mira followed without hesitation, trusting the logic even if she did not fully understand how he had calculated it so quickly. The grass whipped against her legs as she ran, and for a moment the world narrowed down to nothing but the sound of her own breathing, the pounding of her feet against the ground, and the distant, excited yips of 3 wolf pups, enjoying the best afternoon of their young lives. They broke through the grass just as the cart came rattling around the bend, wheels wobbling dangerously on the uneven ground. The man reached it first, grabbing the front rail with both hands and digging his heels into the dirt to slow its momentum. Mira arrived seconds later, throwing her own weight against the side of the cart to help stop it. For a moment, everything seemed to hang in the balance. The cart shuddered, tilted dangerously to one side, and Mira's heart leapt into her throat as she imagined the entire thing tipping over into the stream. But then, with a final groan of protest, the wheels stopped turning, and the cart settled unsteadily, but upright, on the bank of the stream. The 3 pups, sensing that the game had come to an end, immediately let go and sat back on their haunches, tails wagging, as though they were incredibly proud of themselves. Mira collapsed against the side of the cart, breathing hard, relief flooding through her chest. "We stopped it," she said, half laughing in disbelief. "We actually stopped it." "We did," the man agreed, straightening up and brushing dirt from his hands. He looked down at the 3 pups with an expression that was somewhere between exasperation and fondness. "Though I suspect these 3 do not feel nearly as relieved as we do." Clover, the smallest pup, chose that exact moment to trot over and nudge Mira's hand with her small wet nose, looking up at her with wide, innocent eyes, as though she had done nothing wrong at all. Mira could not help but laugh, even as she surveyed the damage around her. Peaches were scattered across the grass and the dirt path behind them, some bruised, some split open, all of them now unfit for the festival market. It was a significant loss, more than she could easily replace on her own, but in this moment, with adrenaline still rushing through her veins, and the absurdity of the entire chase settling over her, she found herself more amused than upset. "I am truly sorry about this," the man said, and his voice had lost its earlier calm authority, replaced instead by something that sounded like genuine embarrassment. "These 3 have a habit of finding trouble wherever they go. I should have been watching them more closely." "It is all right," Mira said, though she was already calculating in her head how much of her harvest she had lost. "No real harm done, I suppose. Just a lot of bruised fruit and a very tired chase." "There is real harm done," the man corrected gently. "You have lost a portion of your harvest because of my pups. That is not something I intend to simply walk away from." Mira looked at him properly for the first time since the chase had begun, taking in the fine quality of his clothing despite its rugged, practical cut, the way he carried himself with an ease that suggested he was used to people listening when he spoke, and those striking gold eyes that seemed to see far more than an ordinary person's eyes ever could. "You are not from the village," she said slowly. It was not really a question. "No," he admitted. "I am not." Before she could ask anything further, the pups, apparently deciding that the excitement of the day was not yet over, bounded toward the stream and began splashing happily in the shallow water, sending droplets flying in every direction. "Pepper, Ash, out of the water," the man called, though there was little real force behind his words this time. He turned back to Mira with an apologetic tilt of his head. "I promise you, this is not usually how my afternoons look." "I find that hard to believe somehow," Mira said, surprising herself with the teasing note in her voice. Perhaps it was the leftover rush of the chase, or perhaps it was simply the strange, easy comfort of standing beside this stranger after they had just accomplished something together, but she felt none of the caution she usually reserved for people she did not know. The man's mouth curved into the beginning of a smile, the first real smile she had seen from him. "Perhaps you are right to doubt me," he said, "though in my defense, they do not normally target unsuspecting orchard keepers and their peach carts." "Well, I suppose I should feel special then," Mira said, glancing down at the mess of fruit scattered around them. "Even if it did cost me half my festival harvest." The man's expression shifted, the humor fading into something more serious. "Let me make this right," he said. "Whatever you have lost today, I will replace, and more besides. It is the least I can do." Mira opened her mouth to protest, some instinct telling her that accepting help from a stranger, however well-intentioned, was not something she should do lightly. But before she could speak, a sharp bark from the stream drew both of their attention. Ash, the middle pup, had waded out a little too far, and was now struggling against a current that was stronger than it looked from the bank. His small legs paddled frantically, and though the water was not deep enough to be truly dangerous, the sight of his panic sent a jolt of alarm through Mira's chest. The man moved instantly, closing the distance to the water's edge, in a blur of motion that left Mira blinking in surprise. He waded into the stream without hesitation, scooping the frightened pup up in his arms and lifting him clear of the water within seconds. "You are all right," he murmured to the pup, his voice gentle now. None of the earlier authority in it, only quiet reassurance. "You are all right, little one." Ash pressed himself against the man's chest, shivering slightly, and the man carried him back to the bank, where Clover and Pepper immediately crowded around, sniffing at their brother with obvious concern. Mira watched the entire scene with a strange warmth blooming in her chest. There was something deeply unguarded about the way this stranger cared for the pups, something that did not match the composed, authoritative figure who had chased down a runaway cart only minutes earlier. "Are they yours?" she asked, once Ash had stopped shivering and was busy licking water off his own paw with great concentration. "I mean, did you raise them yourself?" "In a manner of speaking," the man said, settling the pup down gently on the grass. "They are under my care, yes. Their mother is occupied with other duties. So much of their upbringing falls to me at the moment." "That explains why they do not listen to you very well," Mira said with a small smile. "You are too soft with them." The man let out a short laugh, genuine and unguarded. "You may be the first person brave enough to say that to my face." "Should I not have said it?" Mira asked, suddenly uncertain. No, it is refreshing," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "Most people around me tend to agree with everything I say, whether or not they actually believe it. It becomes tiresome after a while." Mira tilted her head, studying him curiously. There was something in the way he said this that suggested a life very different from her own, a life where people watched their words carefully around him, perhaps out of respect, perhaps out of something closer to fear. She found herself curious about which one it was, though she did not ask. "Well, I have no reason to agree with everything you say," she said instead, bending down to begin gathering the peaches that had survived the chase without too much damage. "So you will have to get used to hearing the truth from me, at least for as long as you are cleaning up this mess with me." "That sounds like a fair arrangement," the man said, and to her surprise, he knelt down beside her and began helping to gather the scattered fruit, despite his clearly fine clothing and the mud already staining the knees of his trousers. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, sorting the peaches into what could still be salvaged and what was too damaged to save. The three pups, having recovered fully from their misadventure in the stream, curled up together in a patch of sunlight nearby and promptly fell asleep, exhausted from their afternoon of chaos. "You still have not told me your name," Mira said eventually, placing a peach into the crate with careful hands. "Kale," the man said. "And you are?" "Mira," she replied. "I keep the orchard just up the hill. Or I did, before your pups decided to redecorate the entire path with peaches." Kale winced, though there was amusement beneath it. "I truly am sorry, Mira. If it means anything, I have never seen them take such an immediate interest in anything before. Perhaps they simply liked the look of your cart. Or the smell of ripe peaches," Mira pointed out. "Wolves do eat fruit sometimes, do they not?" "They do," Kale admitted, though I suspect in this case it was less about hunger and more about the simple joy of causing mischief. Mira laughed, and the sound seemed to surprise both of them slightly, breaking the last of the tension that had lingered from the chase. She looked over at the sleeping pups, their small chests rising and falling peacefully, and felt an unexpected fondness settle over her despite the trouble they had caused. "They are lucky they are cute," she said. "Otherwise I might not forgive them so easily." "That is precisely how they get away with everything," Kale said, shaking his head. "Their mother uses the very same tactic." As they continued gathering the fruit, Mira noticed things about Kale that she had not fully registered during the frantic chase. The way he moved with an economy of motion that suggested years of physical training. the faint but unmistakable presence of something wild beneath his composed exterior, visible in small moments, like the sharpness of his canine teeth when he smiled, or the way his gold eyes seemed to catch even the faintest movement in the grass around them. She did not know exactly what he was, not yet, but some instinct deep inside her whispered that he was not entirely human, and that whatever he was, it carried significant power. "You are staring," Cale observed, not unkindly, glancing up from the peach he was inspecting. "Sorry," Mira said, quickly looking away, a faint warmth rising in her cheeks. "I was just thinking about how strange this afternoon has been." "Strange is one word for it," Cale agreed, "though I have had stranger afternoons, believe it or not." "I find that difficult to imagine," Mira said honestly. Cale's expression grew thoughtful, and for a moment, something flickered behind his gold eyes, some weight or history that he did not immediately share. "There are many things about my life that would surprise you," he said quietly. "Perhaps someday I will tell you about them." Mira did not press him further, sensing that this was not the moment for such conversations. Instead, she focused on finishing the task at hand, salvaging what she could of her harvest, while the afternoon sun slowly began its descent toward the horizon. By the time they had gathered everything that could be saved, the light had turned golden and warm, casting long shadows across the grass. The pups had woken from their nap and were now playing a much gentler game among themselves, tumbling over one another in the soft grass without any carts or peaches involved. "I meant what I said earlier," Cale said, standing up and brushing dirt from his knees. "I will replace what you have lost today, and I will make sure my pups do not cause you any further trouble." "You do not have to do that," Mira said, though she appreciated the offer more than she let on. "It was an accident. These things happen." "Perhaps," Cale said, "but I prefer to make things right when I have the ability to do so. It is important to me." There was something in the way he said this, a quiet conviction, that suggested this was more than simple politeness, that made Mira believe him completely. She nodded, deciding not to argue further. "Well then, I suppose I will see you again," she said, gesturing to the crates of surviving peaches that needed to be carried back up the hill. "If you are planning to bring replacement fruit, that is." "You will see me again," Cale confirmed, and there was something in his voice, some quiet certainty, that sent a small shiver down Mira's spine, though not an unpleasant one. As she began the walk back up the hill toward the orchard, pulling what remained of her cart behind her, Mira glanced back once to see Cale gathering his 3 pups, lifting the sleepy Clover into his arms, while Ash and Pepper trotted along beside him toward the tree line. She did not know yet who he truly was, or what strange world he came from, but as she watched him disappear into the shadows of the forest, with the wolf pups at his side, she felt a strange certainty settle into her chest, a feeling that this chaotic afternoon was only the very beginning of something much larger than a simple runaway cart. The peaches that remained in her crate glowed warm and golden in the fading afternoon light, and Mira found herself smiling despite everything, already wondering when exactly Cale would return, and what other surprises he might bring with him when he did. Little did she know, the forest she watched him vanish into was not simply a forest at all, but the very edge of a kingdom hidden from human eyes, ruled by a man whose true nature was far more powerful and far more dangerous than anything her small village had ever encountered before. That night, as Mira lay in bed replaying the strange events of the day in her mind, she could not shake the image of Cale's gold eyes, or the gentle way he had cared for his pups despite his obvious authority. Something had shifted that afternoon among the scattered peaches and the rushing stream, though she could not yet say exactly what it was. Outside her window, the forest stood dark and silent beneath the rising moon, keeping its secrets close, waiting for the next chapter of this unexpected story to unfold. The next morning arrived with a soft golden light spilling over the orchard, and Mira woke earlier than usual, her mind still turning over the events of the previous day. She dressed quickly, tied her hair back, and made her way outside, half expecting the whole encounter with the wolf pups and the mysterious man named Cale to feel like something she had imagined. But the evidence was still there. Bruised peaches lay scattered near the edge of the path where she had not managed to gather every last one, and the wheel of her cart still wobbled slightly from the rough treatment it had endured. It had been real. She spent the early hours of the morning tending to her remaining trees, checking each branch for ripeness, trying to focus on her work and push aside the strange curiosity that kept pulling her thoughts back toward the forest at the edge of her land. She told herself that whatever Kale was, whoever he was, it did not matter. He had helped her stop the cart. He had promised to make things right, and that would likely be the end of it. People who made such promises rarely returned to keep them, especially strangers with golden eyes and unusual speed. And yet, some quiet part of her hoped that he would. By mid-morning, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching from the direction of the forest, steady and unhurried, and she straightened up from the tree she had been tending, wiping her hands on her apron as she turned to look. Kale walked toward her carrying 2 large woven baskets, one in each arm, both filled to the brim with ripe peaches that looked even more perfect than the ones she had lost the day before. He wore simpler clothing today, a plain tunic and trousers that looked far more suited to walking through an orchard than the fine garments from the previous afternoon, though there was still something about the way he carried himself that made him stand out, an unmistakable presence that no simple clothing could hide. "Good morning," he said, setting the baskets down carefully at the edge of the path. "I told you I would make things right." Mira stared at the baskets, genuinely surprised. "This is far more than what your pups destroyed yesterday," she said, walking over to inspect the fruit. It was beautiful, plump, and richly colored, clearly grown with great care. "Considerate interest for the trouble," Kale said, a faint smile touching his lips, "and an apology for interrupting your entire afternoon. Where did you even get peaches this good on such short notice?" Mira asked, picking one up and turning it over in her hands. "These are better than the ones from my own trees." "I have my ways," Kale said simply, offering no further explanation. Mira narrowed her eyes at him, sensing that there was more to the story than he was letting on, but she decided not to press the matter. Free peaches were free peaches, regardless of how they had been obtained, and her festival harvest was now more secure than it had been the day before. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it sincerely. "This is very generous." "It is the least I could do," Kale replied. He glanced around the orchard, taking in the neat rows of trees, the careful way the branches had been pruned, the general sense of order that Mira had worked hard to maintain over the years. "You care for this place well." "It has been in my family for 3 generations," Mira said, a note of quiet pride entering her voice. "My grandmother planted many of these trees herself. It is not much, but it is mine, and I intend to keep it thriving." "That is admirable," Kale said, and something in his tone suggested he genuinely meant it, not simply offering empty politeness. "There is honor in caring for something with your own hands, watching it grow across years and seasons." Mira looked at him curiously. "You speak as though you understand that kind of dedication yourself." Kale's expression grew thoughtful, his gold eyes drifting toward the distant tree line where the forest began. "In my own way, yes," he said, "though what I care for is somewhat larger than an orchard." Before Mira could ask what he meant, a rustling sound came from the bushes near the path, and a moment later, the 3 pups from the day before came bounding out, tails wagging furiously at the sight of Mira. "Oh no," Mira said, though she could not keep the amusement from her voice. "Should I be worried about my cart again?" "They are on their best behavior today," Kale said, though he did not sound entirely convinced of this himself. "I made sure of it before we left." Clover, the smallest pup, trotted straight up to Mira and sat down at her feet, looking up with wide, hopeful eyes, as though waiting for some kind of reward. Mira laughed and knelt down, scratching gently behind the pup's ears. "You caused quite a lot of trouble yesterday," she told the pup, who simply wagged her tail harder in response, clearly unbothered by the accusation. "They have taken quite a liking to you," Kale observed, watching the scene with an expression Mira could not quite read. "That is unusual. They tend to be wary of strangers. Perhaps they sense that I am not actually angry with them," Mira said, glancing up at him. "Despite everything." "Perhaps," Kale agreed, though there was something else in his voice, something that suggested he found this observation more significant than he was letting on. Ash and Pepper soon joined their sister, and within minutes, all 3 pups were sprawled around Mira's feet, enjoying the attention she gave them, while she continued to work through her morning tasks, checking branches, and gently testing the ripeness of the fruit hanging above her. Kale remained nearby, watching with quiet interest, occasionally offering to help when she needed to reach a higher branch or move a heavy crate. He was surprisingly capable for someone who, based on his earlier clothing and manner of speech, seemed to come from a background of comfort rather than physical labor. "You are stronger than you look," Mira remarked, watching him lift a full crate of peaches with barely any visible effort. "I have had practice," Kale said simply, setting the crate down where she indicated. As the morning wore on, Mira found herself relaxing in his presence in a way that surprised her. There was an ease to their conversation, a natural rhythm that felt as though they had known each other far longer than a single day. She asked him about where he came from, and he answered in careful, vague terms, mentioning a place beyond the forest without specifying exactly what that place was. He asked her about the orchard, about her family, about the festival she was preparing for, and he listened to her answers with genuine attention, his gold eyes fixed on her, as though nothing else in the world mattered more in that moment. "Tell me about this festival," Kale said, as they paused for a short rest beneath the shade of one of the larger peach trees. "What exactly does it celebrate?" "The end of harvest season," Mira explained, settling down onto the grass while the pups continued their playful wrestling nearby. "The whole village gathers to share food, tell stories, and give thanks for the year's crops. It is one of my favorite times of the year." "It sounds like a meaningful tradition," Kale said. "It is," Mira agreed, "though it takes an enormous amount of preparation. Every family contributes something, and the orchards provide much of the fruit used in the cooking and the offerings." "Offerings?" Kale asked, tilting his head slightly. "To the old spirits of the land," Mira explained. "My grandmother always insisted on leaving a portion of the harvest at the edge of the forest, as a sign of respect. She said the forest and the village have always shared this land, and it is important not to forget that." Something shifted in Kale's expression at this, a flicker of surprise, followed by something warmer, something almost pleased. "Your grandmother sounds like she was a wise woman," he said quietly. "She was," Mira said, a note of fondness entering her voice. "She passed a few years ago, but I still follow her traditions. It feels important to keep them alive." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the warm breeze rustling through the leaves above them, the pups' happy barking providing a gentle backdrop to the quiet conversation. Mira found herself studying Kale's profile, the sharp lines of his face, the way the sunlight caught the silver strands in his dark hair, and she wondered again what exactly he was, and why he seemed so interested in her small, simple life. "Can I ask you something?" she said eventually. "Of course," Kale replied. "Yesterday, when you were chasing the cart, you moved faster than anyone I have ever seen," Mira said carefully. "And your eyes are a color I have never seen on a person before. What are you exactly?" Kale was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting toward the pups as they continued to play nearby. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured and careful, as though he was choosing his words with great deliberation. "I am not entirely human, Mira," he said. "I come from a place hidden within this forest, a place where my kind have lived for many generations, separate from the villages and towns of your people. What you witnessed yesterday, my speed, my strength, these are simply part of what I am." Mira absorbed this information slowly, feeling neither fear nor surprise, so much as a quiet confirmation of something she had already suspected. "And the pups?" she asked. "Are they the same as you?" "They will grow to be, in time," Kale said. "Right now they are young, still learning to control the abilities they were born with. That is partly why they got away from me so easily yesterday. Their instincts are strong, but their discipline has not yet caught up." "So you are their guardian," Mira said. "Or their teacher, perhaps." "Something like that," Kale agreed, though there was a slight hesitation in his voice that suggested there was more to his relationship with the pups than he was revealing. Mira considered pressing further, curious about the exact nature of his position and his connection to these young wolves, but something in his expression told her that this was a boundary he was not yet ready to cross, and she respected that, choosing instead to let the conversation drift toward lighter topics. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Kale eventually rose to his feet, gathering the tired pups who had finally worn themselves out from their morning of play. "I should return them before they fall asleep in your grass entirely," he said, though there was reluctance in his voice that had not been there the day before. "You are welcome to visit again," Mira said, surprising herself with how easily the words came. "The orchard could always use an extra pair of hands, and I think your pups have decided they are quite fond of this place." Kale's expression softened into something genuine and warm, a smile that reached his gold eyes in a way his earlier polite smiles had not quite managed. "I would like that," he said. "Very much." As he gathered the sleepy pups and began the walk back toward the forest, Mira watched him go, feeling a strange lightness in her chest that she had not expected from a simple morning spent tending her orchard. Whatever Kale was, whatever strange world he came from, she found that she was not afraid of it, only curious, and perhaps even a little hopeful about where this unexpected connection might lead. The forest swallowed him and the pups into its shadows once more, but this time, Mira did not feel the same uncertainty she had felt the day before. Instead, she felt the quiet beginning of something she could not yet name, something that made the golden peaches hanging heavy on her trees seem to glow just a little bit brighter beneath the midday sun. She returned to her work with a renewed sense of purpose, humming softly to herself as she moved between the rows of trees, already looking forward to whatever the forest might bring her next. Over the following days, Kale returned to the orchard often, sometimes in the early morning before the sun had fully risen, sometimes in the golden hours of late afternoon when the light turned everything the color of honey. He always brought the pups with him, and Mira found herself growing accustomed to the sight of the 3 young wolves bounding across her land, no longer causing chaos but instead settling into a comfortable routine of play and mischief that rarely crossed into destruction. The villagers began to notice. It started with small comments, quiet observations exchanged between neighbors as they passed the orchard on their way to the market. A tall stranger visiting Mira's land so frequently was bound to draw attention in a village where everyone knew everyone else, where new faces were rare and unfamiliar habits were quickly discussed over shared meals and evening gatherings. "Who is that man who keeps coming around your orchard?" asked old Bettina, the village baker, one afternoon as Mira delivered a basket of peaches for the festival preparations. Bettina's eyes were sharp with curiosity, though not unkind. "My grandson said he saw him walking through the orchard again yesterday, with those strange little dogs following him." "They are wolf pups, not dogs," Mira corrected gently, setting the basket down on the counter. "And he is just someone who has been helping me around the orchard. His pups got into a bit of trouble with my cart, and he has been making up for it ever since." Bettina raised an eyebrow, clearly not fully convinced by this simple explanation. "Wolf pups, you say? That is unusual." "We have not seen wolves so close to the village in years, not since the old days when the elders used to speak of the hidden kingdom in the forest." Mira's chest tightened slightly at the mention of the hidden kingdom, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. "I am not sure about any hidden kingdom," she said, which was not entirely a lie, since Kale had not yet told her the full extent of what lay beyond the tree line. "He seems like a kind person, regardless of where he comes from." "Just be careful, dear," Bettina said, patting Mira's hand with genuine warmth. "The forest holds many old stories, some of them not so pleasant. It would not hurt to remember that not everything that looks kind is always what it seems." Mira thanked her for the concern and made her way back toward the orchard, turning Bettina's words over in her mind. She knew the old stories the baker was referring to, tales passed down through generations about a kingdom of wolves that lived hidden within the deep forest, ruled by powerful beings who could take the shape of both man and beast. As a child, she had thought these stories were simply meant to keep young children from wandering too far into the woods alone. Now, having met Kale, she was beginning to wonder how much truth those old tales actually held. When she returned to the orchard, she found Kale already there, sitting on the low stone wall that bordered her property, watching the pups chase each other through the grass. He looked up as she approached, and something in his expression told her that he had sensed her unease even before she said a word. "Is something troubling you?" he asked. Mira hesitated, unsure how to broach the subject without sounding accusatory or overly suspicious. "The villagers are starting to notice your visits," she said eventually. "One of them mentioned old stories, about a hidden kingdom in the forest, ruled by beings who can change their shape." Kale's expression grew serious, though not alarmed. "Those stories are not entirely wrong," he admitted, "though they have grown more exaggerated over the years, as such tales tend to do." "So it is true," Mira said quietly. "There really is a kingdom in the forest." "There is," Kale confirmed. "My kingdom, to be precise." Mira stared at him, processing this admission slowly. "Your kingdom," she repeated. "As in, you rule it." "Yes," Kale said simply. I am what my people call the Alpha King. The pups you have grown so fond of are not simply under my care by chance. They are my responsibility as their leader, part of the next generation I am meant to guide and protect. The weight of this revelation settled over Mira slowly, and she found herself sitting down heavily on the wall beside him, needing a moment to absorb everything he had just told her. A king. Not just some unusual traveler from beyond the forest, but the ruler of an entire hidden kingdom, one that had existed alongside her village for generations, without her ever fully realizing its truth. Why did you not tell me this sooner? She asked, though there was no anger in her voice, only genuine curiosity. I was not certain how you would react, Kale admitted, his gold eyes searching her face carefully. Many humans fear what they do not understand, and I did not wish to frighten you away before you had the chance to know me simply as myself, rather than as a title or a legend. Mira considered this, understanding the logic, even as she processed the strangeness of the situation. I do not think I am afraid, she said slowly, testing the words as she spoke them. Surprised, certainly, but not afraid. Relief flickered across Kale's face, subtle but unmistakable. That means more to me than you might realize, he said quietly. They sat together in silence for a while, watching the pups play in the grass, each lost in their own thoughts. Eventually, Mira spoke again, her curiosity getting the better of her. What is it like? She asked, ruling a kingdom, being responsible for so many people. Kale's expression grew thoughtful, distant, as though he was considering a question he did not often have the chance to answer honestly. It is heavy, he said eventually. There is always something demanding attention, always a decision that affects the lives of many, always the weight of knowing that my choices ripple outward in ways I cannot always predict. It is not a burden I take lightly. That sounds exhausting, Mira said with genuine sympathy. It can be, Kale agreed, which is perhaps part of why I find these visits to your orchard so valuable. Here, I am simply a man helping with peaches and chasing after mischievous pups. There is a simplicity to it that I do not often find within the walls of my own court. Mira felt a warmth spread through her chest at this admission, understanding now why he seemed to relax so completely whenever he stepped through the tree line and into her small orchard. She was, in some strange way, offering him an escape from the weight of his responsibilities, even if only for a few hours at a time. Well, you are welcome to keep escaping here whenever you need to, she said with a small smile, though I cannot promise the pups will always behave. I would not want it any other way, Kale replied, and the genuine warmth in his voice made Mira's heart skip in a way she had not expected. As the afternoon light began to soften toward evening, they continued talking, and Kale shared more about his kingdom, carefully choosing what details to reveal, testing the waters of trust between them, one small revelation at a time. He told her about the vast network of dens hidden throughout the deepest parts of the forest, about the Council of Elders, who advised him on matters too complex for a single ruler to decide alone, about the delicate balance his people maintained with the natural world around them, taking only what they needed and giving back in equal measure. Mira listened with rapt attention, fascinated by this hidden world that had existed just beyond her orchard for her entire life, without her ever fully realizing its depth and complexity. She asked question after question, and Kale answered each one patiently, clearly enjoying the opportunity to share something so central to his identity, with someone who received the information with genuine curiosity, rather than fear. Does your kingdom know you are here? Mira asked eventually, a new concern forming in her mind. Visiting a human village, is that something that is permitted? Kale's expression grew slightly guarded at this question, and Mira sensed that she had touched on something more complicated than she had anticipated. There are those among my council who would prefer I keep more distance from human settlements, he admitted carefully. The history between our peoples has not always been peaceful, and old wounds take a long time to heal fully. But you came anyway, Mira said. I did, Kale confirmed. Because I believe that understanding and connection are more valuable than the fear that keeps our peoples separated. And because, if I am being entirely honest, I find myself drawn to this place, and to you, in a way I did not expect. The directness of this admission caught Mira off guard, and she felt her cheeks warm slightly under his steady gaze. I feel the same way, she admitted quietly. About the orchard being different since you started visiting, I mean. It feels more alive somehow. Kale's smile returned, softer now, more genuine than any expression she had seen from him before. I am glad, he said simply. As evening approached, and the pups began to show signs of tiredness from their long afternoon of play, Kale reluctantly rose to gather them, preparing for the walk back toward the forest and the hidden kingdom that awaited him there. But before he left, he turned back to Mira with a serious expression. I must ask something of you, he said. The knowledge I have shared with you today is not something that should spread carelessly among your village. Not because I do not trust your people, but because the safety of my kingdom depends on maintaining some distance from those who might not understand or accept our existence. I understand, Mira said, and she meant it. Your secret is safe with me. Thank you, Kale said, relief evident in his voice. That trust means a great deal to me. As he walked away with the pups trailing sleepily behind him, Mira remained on the stone wall, watching until the forest swallowed them completely from view. The weight of everything she had learned that afternoon settled over her slowly, but rather than fear or hesitation, she felt only a growing sense of wonder and anticipation for whatever might come next in this unexpected friendship that seemed to be deepening with every passing day. That night, as she lay in bed listening to the distant sounds of the forest through her open window, Mira found herself smiling into the darkness, already looking forward to the next morning when Kale might return, bringing with him the pups, the peaches, and the quiet warmth that had begun to fill spaces in her life she had not even realized were empty. Outside, somewhere deep within the shadowed trees, the hidden kingdom continued its ancient rhythms, unaware that the bond forming between its king and a simple orchard keeper would soon become something far more significant than either of them could have anticipated on that first chaotic afternoon among the scattered peaches. The days that followed brought a rhythm to Mira's life that she had never known before, one shaped by the anticipation of Kale's visits and the quiet joy of watching the pups grow more comfortable in her presence with each passing afternoon. The festival was drawing closer, and the entire village buzzed with preparation, but Mira found her thoughts returning again and again to the forest, and to the man who ruled a kingdom hidden within its depths. One morning, as she was arranging baskets of fruit near the edge of her property, she noticed a figure standing at the tree line that was not Kale. This man was shorter, broader through the shoulders, with dark hair cropped close to his head, and eyes that held none of the warmth she had grown accustomed to seeing in Kale's gaze. He watched her for a long moment, before stepping forward, his expression unreadable. You must be the human the king has been spending so much time with, the man said, his voice carrying a note of skepticism that bordered on disapproval. Mira straightened, setting down the basket she had been carrying. I am Mira, she said carefully. And you are? Doran, the man replied. I serve on the council that advises the Alpha King. I have come to see for myself what has captured his attention so thoroughly these past weeks. There was something in his tone that made Mira feel as though she was being evaluated, weighed against some invisible standard she had not been told about. She kept her posture steady, refusing to let his skepticism unsettle her. I hope I have not disappointed you, she said, a slight edge of challenge in her voice. Doran's expression flickered with something that might have been surprise at her boldness. The king has responsibilities that extend far beyond personal preference, he said. His attention divided between his kingdom and a human village concerns those of us who have sworn to protect our people's future. I have not asked him to divide his attention, Mira replied evenly. He is welcome here, but I have never demanded his time or his presence. And yet he comes anyway, Doran observed, repeatedly, which suggests the choice is entirely his own, driven by something beyond simple obligation. Mira did not know how to respond to this, uncertain whether Doran was warning her away or simply stating an observation that troubled him. Before she could formulate a reply, the sound of familiar footsteps approached from the forest path, and both of them turned to see Kale walking toward them, his expression shifting to one of surprise and then wariness as he took in the scene before him. Doran, Kale said, his voice carrying an authority that had not been present in his earlier conversations with Mira. I did not expect to find you here. I came to see for myself what has been drawing you away from your duties so frequently, Doran replied, though his posture shifted subtly, betraying a deference to Kale's presence that had not been evident when speaking with Mira alone. The council grows concerned, my king. Your visits here have not gone unnoticed. My visits are my own business, Kale said, his tone firm but not unkind. I have not neglected my duties, and I do not intend to begin doing so now. Perhaps not yet, Doran said carefully. But there are those who worry about where this path might lead. Our history with human settlements has not always ended peacefully. Attachments like this one could prove dangerous, for both sides. Mira felt a chill settle over her at these words, understanding for the first time the full weight of the tension that existed between Kale's world and her own, tension that stretched back through generations of complicated history she had only glimpsed in old village stories. I appreciate the council's concern, Kale said, but I trust my own judgment in this matter. Mira has proven herself to be someone of genuine character, and I will not abandon this connection, simply because it makes some members of the council uncomfortable. Doran studied Kale for a long moment, and then his gaze shifted to Mira, something in his expression softening slightly, though wariness still lingered beneath the surface. I hope, for both your sakes, that your judgment proves correct, he said finally. The kingdom's stability depends on unity, and unity can be fragile when new variables are introduced. With that, he turned and disappeared back into the forest, leaving Mira and Kale standing together in uncomfortable silence. I am sorry about that, Kale said eventually, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture that suggested genuine frustration. Doran means well, even if his methods leave much to be desired. Is he right to be concerned? Mira asked quietly. About the danger, I mean. Kale was quiet for a moment, considering his answer carefully. There is always some risk when two different worlds begin to intersect, he admitted, but I do not believe that risk should prevent connection entirely. Fear has kept our peoples apart for generations, and I am not convinced that fear has served either of us well. What kind of history are we talking about? Mira pressed gently. Between your kingdom and human villages. Kale sighed, settling down onto the stone wall, as though the conversation required more weight than he could carry while standing. There was a time, many generations ago, when conflict arose between my ancestors and a nearby human settlement, he said. Misunderstandings led to fear. Fear led to violence, and the wounds from that conflict took a very long time to heal. Since then, my kingdom has maintained careful distance from human settlements, preferring isolation to the risk of repeating those old mistakes. But you did not maintain that distance with me, Mira said. No, Kale agreed, I did not, because something about you, about this place, felt different from the start. I could not simply walk away, even knowing the concerns it might raise among my council. Mira sat down beside him, absorbing the weight of this history and the significance of what it meant that Kale had chosen to set aside generations of caution for the sake of their connection. I do not want to be the cause of trouble for your kingdom, she said honestly. If my presence here creates real danger, I would understand if you needed to keep your distance. Kale turned to look at her, his gold eyes intense with an emotion she could not fully name. I do not wish to keep my distance, he said firmly. Whatever risks exist, I believe they are worth navigating carefully, rather than avoiding entirely. But I understand, if this uncertainty troubles you as well. It does, a little, Mira admitted, but not enough to make me want you to stop visiting. Something in Kale's expression relaxed at these words, relief mixing with something warmer, something that made Mira's heart flutter in a way she was still getting used to. Then we will navigate this together, he said quietly. One careful step at a time. They sat together for a while longer, the earlier tension slowly dissolving as they returned to more comfortable topics, discussing the upcoming festival and the preparations still needed before the celebration could begin. The pups, who had been exploring the far edge of the orchard during the tense conversation with Doran, eventually returned, bounding up to Mira with their usual enthusiasm, apparently unbothered by the earlier confrontation. They seem to trust you completely, Kale observed, watching Clover settle happily into Mira's lap. That is not something they extend easily, even to members of our own kingdom. Maybe they sense that I care about them, Mira said, scratching gently behind the pup's ears. Animals tend to know these things, I think. Perhaps, Kale agreed. Or perhaps they simply share their king's good judgment. Mira laughed at this, appreciating the lightness that had returned to their conversation after the heaviness of discussing council politics and old historical conflicts. That is quite confident of you, she teased. I have earned the right to a little confidence, Cale replied, a genuine smile spreading across his face, after successfully chasing down a runaway cart, at least. As the afternoon wore on, they continued working together in the orchard, preparing more crates of peaches for the approaching festival. Despite the earlier encounter with Doran, and the weight of everything it had revealed about the delicate balance between their two worlds, Mira found that her fondness for Cale had only deepened, strengthened, rather than weakened by the honesty of their conversation. Before he left that evening, Cale paused at the edge of the tree line, turning back to look at her with an expression of quiet determination. Whatever challenges lie ahead, he said, I want you to know that I do not intend to let them stand between us. This connection matters to me, more than I perhaps expected it to. It matters to me too, Mira said softly. With that, he offered her a final smile before disappearing into the forest with the pups, leaving Mira standing alone in the golden light of the setting sun, her heart full of both hope and quiet apprehension about whatever complications might still lie ahead in this unexpected and increasingly significant connection between an orchard keeper and a hidden king. That night, as she prepared for bed, Mira found herself thinking not just about Cale, but about the entire world he represented, a world of ancient history, careful politics, and old wounds that had not yet fully healed. She understood now that their growing bond existed within a much larger and more complicated context than she had initially realized, but rather than deterring her, this understanding only strengthened her resolve to see where this unexpected connection might lead, regardless of the challenges that might arise along the way. The night of the harvest festival arrived wrapped in warm air and the scent of roasted grain, wood smoke, and ripe fruit drifting through the village square. Lanterns hung from every post and doorway, their soft glow mixing with the last golden light of the setting sun, and the sound of laughter and music filled the streets as families gathered to celebrate the end of another successful harvest season. Mira moved through the crowd with a basket of peaches balanced on her hip, greeting neighbors and friends as she made her way toward the long tables where the village's collective harvest was being displayed for the celebration. Her contribution, thanks in large part to Cale's generous replacement of her lost fruit, was among the most bountiful the orchard had produced in years, and she felt a swell of quiet pride as she arranged her peaches alongside the offerings of squash, grain, and preserved goods brought by other families. This is a beautiful harvest, Mira, said old Bettina, admiring the arrangement. Your grandmother would be proud. Thank you, Mira said, smiling warmly. It has been an unusual season, but a good one. As the evening progressed, the village musicians began to play, and couples and families moved into the open space at the center of the square to dance beneath the lantern light. Mira found herself swept up in the celebration, dancing with childhood friends, sharing food with neighbors, and losing herself in the simple joy of community and tradition. It was during a lull in the music, as she stepped away from the dancing to catch her breath near the edge of the square, that she felt a familiar presence approaching from the shadows beyond the lantern light. Cale stepped into view, dressed more formally than she had seen him before, in a dark tunic embroidered with subtle patterns that seemed to shift and catch the light in ways that ordinary fabric did not. His gold eyes found hers immediately, and something in his expression suggested both excitement and nervousness, an unusual combination for someone who normally carried himself with such calm authority. You came, Mira said, unable to hide the surprise and delight in her voice. I could not stay away, Cale admitted, closing the distance between them. I wanted to see this festival you have spoken of so fondly, and I wanted to see you enjoying it. Is it safe for you to be here? Mira asked, glancing around at the crowded square, suddenly conscious of how many curious eyes might notice his presence. I have taken precautions, Cale said, gesturing subtly to his own appearance. To most eyes, I will simply look like an unfamiliar traveler passing through. It is a temporary measure, but an effective one for an evening such as this. Mira studied him more closely and noticed that something about his features did seem slightly different, softened in ways that made him blend more easily into the crowd of village faces, though his gold eyes still retained their striking, unusual color if one looked closely enough. Well, traveler, Mira said, a playful smile spreading across her face, would you care to see what our humble festival has to offer? I would like nothing more, Cale replied, offering his arm in a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and utterly natural between them. They spent the next hour wandering through the festival together, sampling food from various stalls, listening to the musicians, and watching children chase each other through the lantern-lit streets. Cale seemed genuinely delighted by everything he encountered, asking questions about traditions and customs with the same curious attention he had shown during their earlier conversations in the orchard. "This is remarkable," he said, watching a group of elderly villagers demonstrate an old harvest dance for a crowd of enthusiastic children. "There is such warmth in this gathering, such genuine connection between your people. We do not have grand kingdoms or hidden courts," Mira said with a small laugh, "but we have this: community, tradition, the simple joy of celebrating together." "There is nothing simple about what I am seeing," Cale said, his voice unusually thoughtful. "This kind of unguarded joy, this trust between neighbors, it is not something I encounter often in my own world." Mira glanced at him curiously. "Your kingdom does not celebrate together like this." "We do, in our own ways," Cale said, "but there is always an awareness of hierarchy, of position, that shapes how we interact even during moments of celebration. Watching your people tonight, I see something different, something freer." Mira considered this, understanding for the first time just how different their two worlds truly were, despite existing side by side for so many generations. "Perhaps that is something our two peoples could learn from each other," she said thoughtfully. "If the distance between us ever narrows enough to allow it." Cale's expression grew serious at this observation, and for a moment, Mira wondered if she had touched on something too complicated for a light festival evening. But then his expression softened again, and he offered her a small, genuine smile. "Perhaps it already has begun to narrow," he said quietly, "one orchard visit at a time." As the night deepened and the music shifted to a slower, more intimate melody, Cale extended his hand toward her, a silent invitation that Mira accepted without hesitation. They moved together into the dancing crowd, and though Cale admitted he had little experience with human dances, he followed her lead with surprising grace, his movements adapting quickly to the unfamiliar rhythm. "You are a fast learner," Mira said, laughing as he successfully navigated a turn that had briefly confused him moments before. "I have good motivation," Cale replied, his gold eyes fixed on hers, with an intensity that made her breath catch slightly. They danced together as the lanterns swayed gently overhead and the music wrapped around them, and for those few minutes, Mira forgot entirely about council concerns, hidden kingdoms, and old historical conflicts. There was only the warmth of his hand in hers, the steady rhythm of the music, and the growing certainty in her heart that whatever this connection was becoming, it was something worth protecting. As the dance ended, they stepped back from the crowd, both slightly breathless, and found a quiet spot near the edge of the square where they could speak more privately, away from curious ears. "I have something I wish to say to you," Cale said, his expression suddenly serious, though not unkindly so. "What is it?" Mira asked, a flutter of nervous anticipation rising in her chest. "These past weeks, spending time with you, watching you care for your orchard, seeing the way you welcomed my pups, and accepted the truth of what I am, without fear," Cale began, choosing his words carefully. "It has awakened something in me that I did not expect to feel again. A sense of possibility, of hope, that extends beyond simple friendship." Mira's heart pounded as she listened, understanding the direction of his words even before he finished speaking them. "Cale," she said softly, "what are you saying?" "I am saying that I care for you deeply," Cale said, his gold eyes steady and sincere. "More deeply than I anticipated when I first chased that runaway cart down the hill, and I do not wish to hide that feeling any longer, regardless of what complications it might bring." Mira felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, overwhelmed by the honesty and vulnerability in his admission. "I feel the same way," she said quietly. "I have felt it growing for weeks now, though I was not certain how to name it, or whether it was even something I should allow myself to feel." "And now?" Cale asked, his voice carrying a note of hopeful uncertainty. "Now I think I have stopped trying to talk myself out of it," Mira said, a small smile breaking through her emotion. Cale's expression transformed with relief and joy, and he reached out to gently cup her face in his hand, his touch warm and careful despite the obvious strength contained within it. "Then let us stop pretending this is simply friendship," he said softly. "Let us see where this connection truly leads. Together. Mira leaned into his touch, feeling a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the festival lanterns or the warm autumn air. Together, she agreed. They remained there for a long moment, simply existing in the quiet intimacy of this newly acknowledged connection, before the distant sound of music drew their attention back toward the festival still in full celebration behind them. "Shall we return?" Cale asked, offering his arm once again. "Let us," Mira said, taking his arm with a lightness in her step that had not been there before. As they rejoined the celebration, Mira noticed a few curious glances directed their way, villagers clearly noting the unfamiliar traveler who had captured so much of her attention throughout the evening. She felt no embarrassment at this attention, only a quiet contentment that made the entire festival feel brighter, warmer, and more meaningful than any celebration she had experienced before. They continued dancing and talking late into the night, until the musicians finally began packing away their instruments, and the crowd started to disperse toward their homes. Cale walked her back toward the edge of the orchard, the pups having apparently remained hidden somewhere in the forest during his festival visit, and paused at the familiar tree line where their earliest encounters had taken place. "Thank you for tonight," Mira said, reluctant to see the evening end. "It was truly wonderful having you here." "Thank you for allowing me to be part of it," Cale replied. "I will treasure this evening for a very long time." Before he departed into the shadows of the forest, he leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, a simple gesture that nonetheless sent warmth cascading through her entire body. "Until tomorrow," he said softly. "Until tomorrow," Mira echoed, watching him disappear into the darkness, with a smile that remained on her face long after he had vanished from sight. As she walked back toward her small home at the edge of the orchard, the last sounds of the festival fading behind her, Mira felt a profound sense of happiness settle over her, mixed with a quiet awareness that this newfound joy came bound together with real complications and real risks that neither she nor Cale could fully control. But for tonight, beneath the stars and the lingering warmth of the festival lanterns, she allowed herself simply to feel grateful for the unexpected turn her life had taken, grateful for a chaotic afternoon involving 3 mischievous wolf pups and a cart full of peaches that had led her, quite unexpectedly, toward something that felt remarkably like love. In the days following the festival, word of the mysterious traveler who had danced with Mira spread quickly through the village, carried from household to household with the particular speed that only small communities seem to manage. By the time she visited the market 3 days later, nearly everyone she encountered had some question or comment about the handsome stranger who had captured her attention so completely during the celebration. "He seemed very taken with you," said old Bettina, wrapping a loaf of bread for Mira with a knowing smile. "Is he the same man who has been helping in your orchard, the one with the wolf pups?" Mira felt her cheeks warm slightly, uncertain how much detail to share. "Yes, that is him," she admitted. "His name is Cale. He has an unusual look about him," Bettina observed, her tone careful but curious. "Those eyes, especially. I have not seen eyes quite that color on anyone from around these parts." "He comes from somewhere far away," Mira said, offering the same careful half-truth she had used before, "beyond the forest." Bettina studied her for a long moment, and Mira sensed that the older woman suspected there was more to the story than she was being told, though she did not press further. "Well, whoever he is, he clearly cares for you," Bettina said finally. "I have not seen you smile so easily in a long while, dear. Not since your grandmother passed." The observation caught Mira off guard, and she realized with a small jolt that Bettina was right. There had been a heaviness in her life since her grandmother's passing, a quiet loneliness that came from managing the orchard alone, carrying forward traditions without the guidance of the person who had taught them to her. Somewhere in the midst of the chaos with the wolf pups and the growing connection with Cale, that heaviness had begun to lift, replaced by something lighter and far more hopeful. "Thank you, Bettina," Mira said sincerely. "That means a great deal to me." As she continued through the market, gathering supplies for the coming weeks, she encountered similar curiosity from other villagers, some warm and encouraging, others more cautious, echoing the same old stories about the forest and its hidden inhabitants that Bettina had mentioned weeks earlier. Mira navigated these conversations carefully, protecting Cale's secret while allowing enough truth to satisfy the village's natural curiosity about her personal life. When she returned to the orchard that afternoon, she found Kale waiting for her near the stone wall, his expression carrying a mixture of concern and determination that immediately told her something significant was on his mind. "Is everything all right?" she asked, setting down her basket of market goods. "I spoke with the council again this morning," Kale said, his tone measured, but heavy with unspoken tension. "Word of my presence at your village festival has reached them, and they are not pleased." Mira's stomach tightened with worry. "How bad is it?" "Doran remains the most vocal in his concerns," Kale said, "but he is not alone. Several other council members have expressed worry that my growing connection to you, and by extension to your village, represents an unnecessary risk to our kingdom's careful isolation." "What kind of risk do they believe this creates?" Mira asked, trying to understand the full weight of the political complications her relationship with Kale was creating. "They fear that if word spreads too widely about the true nature of the hidden kingdom, it could invite unwanted attention from other human settlements, or worse, from other forces that might seek to exploit that knowledge for their own purposes," Kale explained. "The isolation our kingdom has maintained for generations has protected us from many dangers, and my council worries that I am undermining that protection through my visits here." Mira absorbed this information slowly, understanding the weight of the responsibility Kale carried as a ruler, even as she felt a pang of guilt for potentially contributing to tension within his kingdom. "Do you believe they are right to worry?" she asked carefully. Kale was quiet for a long moment before answering. "I believe caution has its place," he said finally, "but I also believe that fear should not dictate every decision a leader makes. I have taken care to ensure your village does not know the full extent of what lies within the forest, and I trust your discretion completely. The risk, as I see it, remains manageable." "But the council does not share that confidence," Mira observed. "Not entirely, no," Kale admitted. "Though I have made clear to them that I do not intend to end this connection simply because it makes them uncomfortable. My personal happiness, and the genuine good that I believe this connection represents, matters as much to me as maintaining strict tradition for its own sake." Mira reached out and took his hand, offering what comfort she could in the face of such complicated political pressures. "I do not want to cause a rift within your kingdom," she said sincerely. "If there is a way to ease their concerns without ending what we have built together, I would be willing to consider it." Kale squeezed her hand gently, appreciation evident in his gold eyes. "I do not believe ending our connection would actually resolve their concerns," he said. "The council's worries run deeper than simply my visits to your orchard. They stem from generations of accumulated fear about the vulnerability of our kingdom, fear that predates either of us significantly. I do not think retreating from this connection would truly solve that underlying issue, only delay a conversation that our kingdom desperately needs to have about its relationship with the wider world." "That is a heavy responsibility to carry," Mira said softly. "It is," Kale agreed. "But it is a responsibility I accepted when I took the throne, and I do not intend to shy away from difficult conversations simply because they are uncomfortable." They sat together in contemplative silence for a while, the weight of the political complications settling over them both, though neither expressed any desire to let that weight break the connection they had built. Eventually the pups, who had been exploring the far reaches of the orchard, returned, and clambered up onto the stone wall beside them, seeking attention and affection that helped to lighten the somber mood that had settled over the conversation. "They always know exactly when to interrupt serious conversations," Mira said, with a small laugh, scratching behind Ash's ears as he nuzzled against her arm. "A useful skill," Kale agreed, his expression softening as he watched the pup's playful antics. "Perhaps one I should learn to employ during particularly difficult council sessions." As the afternoon light began to shift toward evening, a new figure emerged from the tree line, moving with a caution that immediately drew Mira's attention. Unlike Doran's earlier confrontational approach, this figure hung back at the edge of the forest, watching the scene before them with an expression that was harder to read, something calculating and distant that sent a small chill down Mira's spine. "Who is that?" she asked quietly, nodding toward the distant figure. Kale turned to look, and his entire posture shifted immediately, alertness replacing the relaxed comfort of moments before. "I do not recognize him," he said, his voice low and serious. "He is not a member of my council. nor anyone I have seen within our territory before." The stranger remained at the edge of the trees for a long moment, his gaze fixed on Kale, with an intensity that felt distinctly unfriendly, before turning and disappearing back into the shadows of the forest without a word. "That was strange," Mira said, unease settling into her chest. "Yes," Kale agreed, his expression troubled. "Strange, and concerning. I do not know who that was, but his presence here, watching us so openly, suggests that our situation may be more complicated than simply managing my own council's concerns." "Do you think he means us harm?" Mira asked, glancing toward the now empty tree line with growing worry. "I do not know," Kale admitted honestly, "but I intend to find out. In the meantime, I want you to be cautious, Mira. Do not venture too far from the village alone, and send word immediately if you notice anything unusual." The sudden shift from the warmth of their earlier conversation to this new, tangible sense of danger left Mira feeling shaken, though she nodded her agreement, understanding the seriousness in Kale's tone. "I will be careful," she promised. As Kale prepared to depart that evening, gathering the pups and preparing to investigate the identity of the mysterious stranger, he paused to press a gentle, reassuring kiss to Mira's forehead. "Whatever this threat turns out to be," he said quietly, "I will not allow it to reach you. That is my promise." Mira watched him disappear into the forest with the pups, the earlier joy of the festival now tempered by a new and unwelcome sense of foreboding. As she made her way back toward her small home, as darkness settled fully over the orchard, she could not shake the feeling that the peaceful rhythm of her life, so recently enriched by Kale's presence, was about to be tested in ways she had not yet begun to imagine. Several days passed without any further sign of the mysterious stranger, though the unease he had left behind lingered in the back of Mira's mind, coloring even her quietest moments in the orchard with a faint undercurrent of watchfulness. Kale visited less frequently during this time, occupied with what he described only as necessary investigations within his kingdom, though he sent word through small, careful means to reassure her that he had not forgotten about her or the concerning encounter at the tree line. When he finally returned to the orchard on a cool, overcast morning, his expression carried the weight of troubling news. "I have learned who the stranger was," he said, settling onto the familiar stone wall, while the pups, sensing the seriousness of the moment, remained unusually subdued beside him. "Tell me," Mira said, setting aside the basket of apples she had been sorting to give him her full attention. "His name is Varric," Kale said. "He leads a smaller pack that has long resented my kingdom's authority over the broader forest territory. There has been tension between our packs for years, though it has mostly remained a matter of quiet rivalry rather than open conflict." "And now?" Mira asked, sensing that this careful explanation was building toward something more concerning. "Now, it seems, Varric has learned of my connection to you," Kale said, his gold eyes darkening with worry. "My advisors believe he sees this as an opportunity, a perceived weakness he might exploit to challenge my authority and destabilize my kingdom." Mira felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. "Because of me," she said quietly. "Because of choices I made, knowing the risks involved," Kale corrected firmly, reaching out to take her hand. "This is not your burden to carry, Mira. I chose to pursue this connection, despite the political complications it might create, and I do not regret that choice, regardless of what Varric might attempt. But if he sees me as a weakness, does that not put me in danger?" Mira asked, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her chest. Kale's expression grew grim. "It is a possibility I cannot ignore," he admitted, "which is why I have arranged for additional protection around your orchard, discreet enough not to alarm your village, but present enough to respond quickly, should Varric attempt anything foolish." "Protection," Mira repeated, absorbing the reality of what this meant, that her simple life tending an orchard had become entangled in a conflict far larger and more dangerous than she had ever anticipated when she first chased a runaway cart down the hill. "I am sorry to bring this danger to your doorstep," Kale said, genuine remorse evident in his voice. "If I had known the full extent of what our connection might invite, I would have taken greater precautions from the very beginning." Mira squeezed his hand, offering what reassurance she could despite her own growing worry. "I do not regret this connection either," she said firmly. "Whatever challenges it brings, I would rather face them alongside you than have never known you at all." Kale's expression softened with gratitude and affection, though the worry did not fully leave his eyes. "Your courage continues to surprise me," he said quietly. "Most would have fled from such danger without a second thought." "Perhaps I am simply stubborn," Mira said with a small, brave smile. "My grandmother always said it was my most notable trait, for better or worse." Over the following days, Mira noticed subtle signs of the protection Kale had arranged, occasional glimpses of movement at the edge of the tree line, a watchfulness in the forest that had not been present before. She tried to maintain her normal routine, despite this underlying tension, continuing her work in the orchard, preparing for the coming winter months, and spending whatever time she could with Kale when his responsibilities allowed him to visit. It was during one such visit, nearly a week after learning about Varric's identity, that the quiet tension finally broke. Mira was gathering the last of the season's fruit from the highest branches of her oldest peach tree when she heard the pups begin to bark with unusual urgency near the edge of the orchard. She turned quickly, her heart already pounding with instinctive alarm, and saw several unfamiliar figures emerging from the tree line, their postures aggressive and their intentions clearly hostile. "Mira, get back!" Kale's voice rang out sharply from somewhere behind her, and she turned to see him moving toward her with the same unnatural speed she had witnessed during their very first encounter. His expression transformed into something fierce and protective that she had not seen from him before. The pups scrambled to hide behind a nearby crate, their earlier playfulness replaced by genuine fear, as the strangers advanced further into the orchard. Mira's mind raced, trying to process the sudden shift from peaceful afternoon to genuine danger, as she quickly moved to shield the frightened pups with her own body, refusing to abandon them despite her own fear. "Varric sends his regards," one of the strangers called out, his voice carrying a mocking edge that made Mira's blood run cold. He thought it was time the Alpha King learned that his human distraction comes with consequences. Kale's entire demeanor shifted in response to these words, something powerful and dangerous rippling beneath his composed exterior, as he positioned himself between the intruders, and both Mira and the pups. "Leave now," he said, his voice carrying an authority so absolute that even Mira felt a shiver run through her at the sound of it. "This is your only warning." The strangers exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options against the obvious power radiating from Kale's stance, but their leader stepped forward regardless, apparently unwilling to retreat without at least attempting to fulfill whatever purpose had brought them to the orchard. "Varric grows tired of watching you weaken our kingdom's traditions," the leader said. "Perhaps if we remove the source of this distraction, you will remember where your true priorities should lie." The threat hung in the air, unmistakable in its intention, and Mira felt fear coil tightly in her chest, not for herself, but for the pups trembling beside her, and for Kale, who now stood as the only barrier between genuine danger and the people he had sworn to protect. "You will not touch her," Kale said, his voice dropping to something low and dangerous, "or these pups, while I still draw breath." The confrontation that followed happened almost too quickly for Mira to fully process, a blur of movement and raw power, as Kale met the approaching threat, with a ferocity that left no doubt about the true extent of his abilities as the ruler of his kingdom. Mira gathered the pups close, shielding them as best she could while the conflict unfolded before her, her heart pounding with fear for Kale's safety, even as she marveled at the sheer force of what he truly was beneath his gentle, careful exterior. Whatever the outcome of this confrontation would be, Mira understood in that terrifying, clarifying moment that the peaceful simplicity of her life had changed forever, and that the connection she had built with Kale now demanded a courage and resilience she had never before been called upon to summon. The fight did not last long. Kale moved with a speed and precision that left the intruders little chance to press their advantage, his movements economical and controlled, despite the raw power evident in every strike. Within minutes, the leader of the group lay pinned beneath Kale's grip, his earlier confidence replaced by genuine fear, as he stared up into eyes that had gone from warm gold to something far more primal and commanding. "Return to Varric," Kale said, his voice carrying a coldness that Mira had never heard from him before, "and tell him that this was his only opportunity for mercy. If he sends anyone else to threaten what is mine, I will not show restraint a second time." The remaining intruders, who had scattered during the brief but decisive confrontation, quickly gathered their fallen leader and retreated back into the shadows of the forest, without further argument. clearly recognizing that they had significantly underestimated the true extent of Kale's power and resolve. Once the immediate danger had passed, Kale's fierce expression softened almost instantly as he turned back toward Mira and the pups, concern replacing the cold authority of moments before. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently, closing the distance between them in a few quick strides. "I am fine," Mira said, though her voice trembled slightly with the lingering adrenaline of the encounter. "The pups are frightened, but unharmed." Kale knelt down immediately, gathering the 3 trembling pups into his arms, with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with the fierce power he had displayed only moments earlier. "You are safe now," he murmured to them, his voice soft and reassuring. "I have you." Mira watched this transition with a growing understanding of the complexity that existed within Kale, the way he could shift so completely between devastating strength and profound gentleness, both equally genuine expressions of who he truly was. She realized, in that moment, that she had witnessed something few humans likely ever saw, the full and unguarded truth of what it meant to be the Alpha King, both protector and nurturer in equal measure. "I am sorry you had to see that," Kale said, once the pups had calmed somewhat, though his gold eyes remained troubled. "That is not a side of myself I ever wished to reveal to you. You were protecting us," Mira said firmly, reaching out to place a steady hand on his arm. "There is nothing to apologize for." "There is danger in what I am," Kale said quietly. "Danger that I have tried to keep separate from the gentleness I hope to offer you. Seeing that danger firsthand, I would understand if it changed how you see me." Mira considered his words carefully, understanding the vulnerability behind them, the fear that his true nature might drive her away now that she had witnessed its full extent. "It does not change how I see you," she said finally. "If anything, it only deepens my understanding of everything you carry, and everything you are willing to sacrifice to protect those you care about." Relief washed visibly over Kale's expression, though the weight of the confrontation still lingered in his posture. "This will not be the last attempt Varric makes," he said grimly. "I fear this confrontation has only confirmed his belief that targeting you represents his best opportunity to challenge my authority. Then we must be prepared for whatever comes next," Mira said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her own resolve, despite the fear still coursing through her body. Kale studied her for a long moment, something like admiration mixing with his lingering concern. "Your courage continues to remind me why this connection matters so much to me," he said softly. They spent the remainder of that day reinforcing the orchard's defenses as best they could, Kale arranging for additional protection from his most trusted guards, while also teaching Mira some basic techniques for protecting herself, should another confrontation arise before proper defenses could be established. Despite the fear that lingered from the earlier attack, Mira found a strange comfort in this active preparation, preferring to face the danger directly, rather than remain passively fearful. That evening, as darkness settled over the orchard and the immediate adrenaline of the confrontation finally began to fade, Doran arrived unexpectedly at the tree line, his expression carrying none of the earlier skepticism that had colored their first meeting. "I heard what happened," Doran said, approaching cautiously. "Word travels quickly within the kingdom, especially news of this nature." "Varric grows bolder," Kale said, his tone weary but resolute. "This attack confirms what we feared. He sees Mira as a vulnerability he can exploit." Doran was quiet for a moment, studying Mira with an expression that had shifted significantly from their earlier encounter. "I confess," he said finally, "I did not expect to find you standing so firmly in the face of genuine danger. Many humans would have fled at the first sign of such conflict." "I am not interested in fleeing," Mira said simply. "Whatever risks come with this connection, I have chosen to face them." Something in Doran's expression softened at this response, a grudging respect replacing his earlier wariness. "Perhaps I misjudged the strength of your character," he admitted. "The Council's concerns about this connection have not entirely vanished, but I find myself reconsidering some of my earlier objections." "That means a great deal coming from you," Kale said, genuine gratitude evident in his voice. "Do not mistake this for full approval," Doran cautioned, though the edge in his voice had softened considerably. "But I am willing to advocate for a more measured approach among the Council, rather than continued pressure to sever this connection entirely." As Doran departed back toward the forest, promising to bring word of the attack to the full council for further discussion. Mira felt a small but significant shift in the political landscape surrounding her relationship with Kale. A shift that offered a fragile hope amid the very real danger that Varric's continued hostility represented. "This is progress," Kale said, watching Doran disappear into the shadows. "Small, perhaps, but meaningful." "It seems your council is beginning to see what I have known for some time," Mira said with a tired but genuine smile. "That this connection is worth the risks it carries." Kale pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in a gesture that offered comfort and reassurance after the exhausting events of the day. "Whatever the council ultimately decides," he said quietly, his voice muffled slightly against her hair, "know that my commitment to you remains unshaken. Varric's threats will not change that, regardless of how many attempts he makes." Mira leaned into his embrace, drawing strength from his steady presence, despite the uncertainty that still lay ahead. "Then we will face whatever comes together," she said firmly. "One challenge at a time, just as we have faced everything else since that very first chaotic afternoon." As the pups, now fully recovered from their earlier fright, curled up together nearby, finally settling into peaceful sleep beneath the darkening sky, Mira and Kale remained standing together, at the edge of the orchard, united in their determination to protect what they had built together, regardless of whatever dangers Varric and his allies might still bring against them in the days ahead. The night air grew cool around them, carrying the scent of ripening fruit and turning leaves, a reminder that the season was shifting, just as their own circumstances had shifted so dramatically over these past weeks. But beneath the uncertainty and the very real danger that now shadowed their connection, Mira felt something unshakable settling within her heart, a certainty that whatever trials lay ahead, she would face them without regret, standing firmly beside the king, who had first entered her life, chasing after 3 mischievous wolf pups and a runaway cart full of peaches. A full week passed in tense anticipation before Varric made his next move, and when it finally came, it arrived with a boldness that neither Mira nor Kale had fully anticipated. It happened on a crisp morning, the sky heavy with clouds that threatened the season's first real cold snap, as Mira was making her way through the orchard checking the last of the trees before winter fully settled in. She noticed the silence first, an unnatural stillness that had fallen over the forest edge, no birdsong, no rustling of small creatures through the underbrush, only a heavy, watchful quiet that raised the hair on the back of her neck. The pups, who had been playing nearby, suddenly went rigid, their playful energy replaced by alert wariness as they turned as one toward the tree line. "Something is wrong," Mira murmured, reaching instinctively for the pups, drawing them closer to her side. A moment later, Varric himself stepped out from the shadows of the forest, and Mira understood immediately why his mere presence commanded such fear among Kale's people. He was tall, broader even than Kale, with dark eyes that held none of the warmth she had grown accustomed to seeing, only cold calculation and barely restrained aggression. "So this is the human who has caused so much disruption within the Alpha King's court," Varric said, his voice carrying a mocking edge as he studied Mira with open contempt. "I confess, I expected someone more remarkable." "Leave this place," Mira said, drawing on the courage that had carried her through the previous confrontation, though her heart pounded with genuine fear at facing this threat, without Kale's immediate presence beside her. "I do not take orders from humans," Varric replied coldly, taking another step forward. "I came here today to finish what my subordinates failed to accomplish. Once you are removed from this equation, the Alpha King will have no choice but to return his full attention to the kingdom, where it belongs." Mira's mind raced, searching for any option that might buy time or create distance between herself and this clearly dangerous threat. She began backing away slowly, keeping the pups sheltered behind her, though she knew instinctively that outrunning Varric would be impossible, given what she had already witnessed of his kind's speed and strength. "Kale will not simply let this happen," she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Kale is occupied elsewhere this morning, dealing with a distraction I arranged specifically for this purpose," Varric said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "By the time he realizes his error, it will already be too late." Panic rose sharply in Mira's chest at this revelation. Understanding that Varric had carefully planned this confrontation to occur, when Kale's protection would be absent. She glanced quickly toward the pups, making a split-second decision to draw Varric's attention away from them, positioning herself more directly between the threat and the young wolves who could not yet defend themselves. "If you want to hurt someone, then face me directly," she said, forcing steel into her voice despite her racing heart. "Leave the pups out of this." Something flickered in Varric's expression at this, a grudging surprise at her defiance, though it did nothing to diminish the threat radiating from his posture as he advanced closer. "Brave, for a human," he said, "though bravery alone will not save you." Just as Varric lunged forward, closing the remaining distance with terrifying speed, a powerful shape burst from the tree line, intercepting his advance with such force that both figures went tumbling into the grass in a blur of motion and raw power. Mira stumbled backward, pulling the pups protectively against her, as she realized with overwhelming relief that Kale had arrived just in time, apparently having seen through Varric's diversion far more quickly than the rival leader had anticipated. "You should have known better than to think a simple distraction would keep me from protecting what matters most to me," Kale snarled, his voice carrying a ferocity that sent a chill through the air as he pressed his advantage against Varric's larger frame. The confrontation that followed was unlike anything Mira had witnessed before, a display of raw power and primal fury as the two leaders clashed with an intensity that shook the very ground beneath them. Mira watched in a mixture of terror and awe, keeping the pups safely shielded as branches snapped and the earth churned beneath the force of their struggle. "This ends now, Varric," Kale growled, finally gaining the upper hand after a brutal exchange that left both combatants breathing heavily. "Your ambition has cost you any claim to mercy you might have once deserved." Varric, pinned beneath Kale's overwhelming strength, stared up with a mixture of hatred and grudging acknowledgement of his defeat. "This will not end, simply because you have bested me today," he spat. "There are others who share my concerns about your leadership." "Then let them come forward openly, rather than sending cowards to threaten innocent lives," Kale replied, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority as king. "But you, Varric, will face judgment before the full council for this attack, and for the danger you brought against someone under my protection." As Kale's most trusted guards emerged from the forest to take custody of the defeated rival, Kale finally allowed himself to turn back toward Mira, his fierce expression melting instantly into profound relief and concern as he took in her trembling but unharmed form. "Mira," he said, crossing the distance between them in an instant, gathering her and the pups into a protective embrace. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you?" "I am all right," Mira said, though her voice trembled with the lingering shock of everything that had just occurred. "You arrived in time. We are safe." Kale held her close for a long moment, his relief palpable as he pressed a grateful kiss to the top of her head. "I feared I would not reach you in time," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to display so openly. "When I realized what Varric's true intentions were, I have never run so fast in my entire life." "You saved us," Mira said, looking up at him with gratitude and love mixing freely in her expression. "Just as you promised you would." As Varric was led away in restraints toward whatever judgment awaited him within the kingdom, Kale remained with Mira and the pups, ensuring they had all recovered fully from the terrifying encounter, before finally allowing himself to relax even slightly. "This threat is finally resolved," he said, though there was a weariness in his voice that spoke to the toll this ongoing conflict had taken on him. "With Varric's defeat and capture, I do not believe any further challenges to our connection will emerge so aggressively." "What will happen to him?" Mira asked, curious, despite everything he had attempted against her. "He will face the full council, and judgment will be rendered according to our laws," Kale said. "Whatever the outcome, his ability to threaten you or my kingdom's stability further will be permanently addressed." Mira nodded, understanding that this was a matter for Kale's kingdom to resolve, according to its own traditions and justice systems, separate from her own involvement in the conflict. "Then I suppose this chapter is finally closed," she said, relief washing over her as the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly began to fade. "Not closed," Kale corrected gently, reaching out to cup her face in his hands, "but perhaps, finally, resolved enough that we can look forward without this shadow hanging over us any longer." The pups, sensing that the danger had truly passed, began to relax as well. Their earlier fear, giving way gradually to renewed playfulness as they nudged against Mira's legs, seeking the comfort and affection that had become so familiar between them over these past weeks. As the clouds overhead finally began to break, allowing thin streams of sunlight to filter down through the orchard, Mira felt a profound sense of gratitude settle over her. Gratitude for Kale's protection, for the resolution of this dangerous conflict, and for the unwavering strength of the connection they had built together, despite every obstacle that had been thrown in their path. "Come," Kale said softly, offering his hand. "Let us return to something calmer for a while. I believe we have both earned a moment of peace." Mira took his hand gratefully, and together, with the pups trailing happily behind them, they made their way back toward the heart of the orchard, leaving behind the tension and danger of the morning's confrontation, ready to embrace whatever calmer days might now lie ahead of them. In the weeks that followed Varric's defeat, a quiet peace settled over both the orchard and the hidden kingdom within the forest. The council, having witnessed firsthand the depth of Kale's commitment to protecting Mira, and having seen her own courage displayed so clearly during the confrontation, gradually softened their earlier objections. Even Doran, once among the most skeptical voices against the connection, became one of its more vocal supporters, often visiting the orchard himself to check on Mira's well-being and to spend time with the pups he had once viewed with such wariness. Winter arrived gently that year, dusting the orchard with a light frost that left the bare branches sparkling in the early morning light. Mira spent the quiet months preparing for the coming spring planting season, her days filled with the familiar rhythms of orchard maintenance, though now regularly interrupted by Kale's visits and the joyful chaos the pups continued to bring with them, even as they grew steadily larger and more capable of controlling their boundless energy. It was on a particularly clear evening, as the first signs of spring began to show in the budding branches around them, that Kale arrived at the orchard carrying himself with a nervous energy that Mira had rarely seen from him before. "You seem troubled," Mira observed, setting aside the tools she had been using to prune the nearest tree. "Is something wrong?" "No," Kale said quickly, though his hands, usually so steady, fidgeted slightly at his sides. "Nothing is wrong. I simply have something important I wish to discuss with you." Mira's curiosity piqued at his unusual nervousness, and she gestured toward the familiar stone wall where so many of their significant conversations had taken place over the past months. "Then let us sit, and you can tell me what is on your mind." Kale settled beside her, taking a deep breath before speaking. "These past months, since that chaotic afternoon when my pups first disrupted your peach harvest, have changed my life in ways I never anticipated," he began. "I have faced political pressure from my own council, genuine danger from Varric's ambitions, and through it all, you have remained steady, courageous, and completely devoted to this connection between us." "As have you," Mira said softly, sensing the weight building behind his words. "I have come to understand something during these trials," Kale continued, his gold eyes steady and sincere as he looked at her. "I do not simply care for you, Mira. I love you, completely and without reservation, and I find that I cannot imagine my future, whether as king or simply as myself, without you standing beside me." Mira's breath caught, tears already beginning to gather at the corners of her eyes as she understood the direction of his words. "I know that joining my life means accepting complications that most would never willingly choose," Kale continued, reaching into his pocket to retrieve a small object wrapped carefully in soft cloth. "It means facing continued challenges from those who fear the connection between our two worlds. It means accepting a position that carries significant responsibility and, at times, real danger. But it also means a lifetime built on genuine love, mutual respect, and the kind of partnership I have never dared to hope for until I met you." He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a delicate ring, crafted from materials Mira did not recognize, but that caught the evening light with a warm, subtle glow, clearly the product of the same hidden craftsmanship that existed within his kingdom. "Mira," Kale said, his voice thick with emotion as he knelt before her, "will you do me the honor of becoming my mate, my equal, and my queen? Will you stand beside me, not simply as someone I protect, but as someone who shares fully in both the joys and the burdens of leading our kingdom into a future where our two worlds might finally begin to understand one another?" Mira stared at him for a long, breathless moment, overwhelmed by the depth of emotion and commitment contained within his proposal. She thought of everything they had faced together since that first chaotic afternoon, the danger, the political complications, the deepening love that had grown steadily stronger through every challenge. She thought of her grandmother's old traditions, of the quiet loneliness she had carried since her passing, and how completely that loneliness had been replaced by the warmth and partnership Cale had brought into her life. "Yes," she said finally, her voice breaking with joyful emotion. "Yes, Cale, I will stand beside you, through whatever challenges and whatever joys the future brings." Cale's expression transformed, with pure, unguarded happiness, as he slipped the ring onto her finger, and then rose to pull her into an embrace filled with relief, love, and profound gratitude. The pups, sensing the joyful shift in the atmosphere, immediately began bounding around them in excited circles, adding their own enthusiastic celebration to the moment. "You have made me happier than I ever believed possible," Cale murmured against her hair, holding her close beneath the darkening sky. "Thank you for choosing this path with me, despite everything it will require of you." "I would choose it again 1,000 times over," Mira said, laughing through her happy tears, as the pups continued their joyful antics around them. News of their engagement spread quickly through both the village and the Hidden Kingdom, and though some skepticism remained among those still cautious about the blending of their two worlds, the overwhelming response was one of genuine celebration. The villagers, having grown fond of Mira over her lifetime among them, welcomed the news with warm enthusiasm, while within the kingdom, the council, now largely won over by Mira's demonstrated courage and devotion, prepared to celebrate the union of their king with genuine goodwill. Their wedding took place the following autumn, timed once again to coincide with the peach harvest, a fitting tribute to the chaotic afternoon that had first brought them together. The ceremony blended traditions from both worlds, human customs of community celebration, merging seamlessly with the deeper, more ancient rituals of Cale's kingdom, creating something entirely new that honored both of their heritages equally. As the celebration continued late into the evening, lanterns glowing warmly against the darkening sky, Mira found herself standing at the edge of the orchard with Cale, watching the pups, now nearly grown, playing together in the same grass where their chaotic first meeting had taken place. "Do you remember how frightened I was when they first stole my cart?" Mira asked, laughing softly at the memory. "I remember thinking I had never chased anything with quite so much determination in my entire life," Cale replied, his arm wrapped comfortably around her shoulders. "Though I have come to be deeply grateful for their mischief, since it led me directly to you." "As am I," Mira said, leaning into his embrace with contentment. Who would have thought that a runaway cart full of peaches would lead to something so wonderful? As the newly married couple continued watching the pups play beneath the golden evening light, surrounded by the warmth of both their families and communities finally united in celebration, Mira felt a deep and lasting peace settle over her heart. The challenges they had faced together, the danger they had overcome, and the love they had built through every trial, had brought them to this moment, a moment that felt like the true beginning of a lifetime, filled with partnership, purpose, and the kind of profound happiness that neither of them had dared to imagine before that first chaotic afternoon among the scattered peaches. The orchard continued to flourish in the years that followed, its trees growing stronger with each passing season, much like the bond between its keeper and the Alpha King who had once chased a runaway cart down its winding paths. And though new challenges would inevitably arise, as they always do in any life worth living, Mira and Cale faced them together, side by side, exactly as they had promised each other, beneath the peach trees on that unforgettable autumn evening, when a simple harvest had transformed into the beginning of an extraordinary love story.